Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Andrea Kita and I'm a folklorist, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about what folklore is. So part of the reason why I'm doing this video is because I think a lot of people have an idea in their head about what folklore is and what it isn't, and I want to talk a little bit about what it is really as an academic discipline and how we kind of see folklore. So let's start at the very, very beginning. Folklore is a compound word. It brings up the words folk and lore. So the folk being the people and the lore being the stuff. And I think that actually kind of works because when we think about folklore, everyone has folklore. It's not that certain people or certain areas have more or less folklore. Everyone has it. So it's a really democratic thing. We all have folklore, which is so cool that we all get to participate in this. And we all do participate in this all the time. The lore is the stuff. So I think that's actually just the easiest way to kind of define it because it's a lot of different things. And I could give you like sort of a laundry list of like everything that is folklore, but honestly, it's more about the approach than it is about like actually putting it into a genre or not. And new genres are being created all the time. So, a few years ago, we didn't really think of fan fiction as being anything other than, maybe just things people wrote about something they were really passionate about. But now we actually even see that fan fiction is a part of folklore as well. So there's always constantly new genres being developed and new ways to think about things as being folklore, which is part of the reason why it's so interesting and exciting. And I think that's one of the problems, is a lot of people tend to think of folklore as only being old stuff. And it certainly does involve things that are traditional and things that we've had for long periods of time, but it also is things that are new. So folklore is being developed constantly every single day. And that's part of what makes it so exciting. And that's why probably one of my favorite definitions of folklore actually comes from the American Folklore Society. And it's what folklore is: what you do, make, say, believe, and know. And I love that definition because it's all verbs. And I think that's so cool to have that idea that it's so active, because it is an active process. People are constantly recreating and making folklore, and also folklore changes over time. So sometimes we drop things and we don't do things anymore. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just kind of the way it goes. That's part of the process of folklore. So I like that: do, make, say, believe, know, because it's all these things that we actively do, all these things that we actively participate in on a daily basis. And so I love that definition because it talks about, just the things that, to break it down, the things that we do. So the things we do every day that we don't really even think that much about. The things that we make. So making different things. A lot of people always think like old quilts when they think folklore. And yeah, this is part of it. That's one of those things we make. But we make a lot of other stuff too. We make YouTube videos. We make food. So there's a lot of different ways to think about it in that way. Also the things we say, so it might be anything from the stories we tell to little sayings we use, like breaking a mirror, 7 years bad luck. The things we believe, so all of those things that we just kind of hold as being true, and the things that we believe, back to that mirror being bad luck, whether or not you believe that. You might say it even if you don't believe it. So there's that aspect of it too, of belief in both the things you actually believe and the things that you maybe don't believe but say anyway. So that's kind of interesting. We'll get more into that in another video. And then lastly, the things that you just know. There's a lot of stuff we just know how to do, and that gives us our cultural competence within our own culture. And I think that's the stuff we just know is the most evident when we actually go into other cultures and we're like, oh wait, things aren't like this anymore. They're not the way I remember doing them. And that's when we actually see all that stuff that we just know, right? It could be anything from what you wear to a funeral to where you sit in a classroom. It's just stuff you know, and you don't necessarily know how you learned it. You just know it, right? And it's more obvious when all of a sudden you don't know what the social norms are. So that's a pretty interesting one too to see. So all of that stuff is folklore. And I think that's what makes folklore so amazing, is that it's all these little tiny things in our lives that we don't necessarily think about all the time. So that's another thing I actually like to refer to folklore as is informal knowledge. So all that stuff that you maybe don't know, that you were never formally taught in any sort of institution or any sort of formal way, that's part of folklore as well. And sometimes if I'm also doing a shorter one, I'll also call it expressive culture. So all those different ways that we express ourselves, that we're not always aware of those things. Sometimes we don't think about, when we tell a story, how much it actually says about us and what our values are and our beliefs are. So there's a lot of times when we sometimes participate in folklore without even really realizing we're doing it, which is another reason why it's so interesting to me, because it's all the stuff that a lot of other disciplines just don't study. And that's why it's just amazing to sit around and think about, because it really deconstructs those little things that we do every day, but that really have a lot of meaning for us. So if something feels off or isn't right, it's probably because of something we've been taught in the past that maybe isn't that important, but it just doesn't feel right. And that's when we get into the things right? That's that kind of stuff. Another thing I kind of just wanted to bring up too is this idea that folklore is incorrect or is false. A lot of times people will say that the term, that's just folklore, which drives me crazy as a folklorist, both because nothing is just folklore, right? All of this stuff is so important. And also because it has this idea too that it's necessarily false. And not all folklore is false. Some of it is, but not all of it is. So it doesn't necessarily have to be false in order for it to be folklore. So that's another kind of thing to think about. Some folklore is true, some of it's false. So it doesn't, but that's not really our focus. As folklorists, we're not so concerned with proving things right or wrong. We're more interested in why. So why do people do these things? Why do they believe in these things? Why do they participate? What about it says something to them or speaks to them, or why are they passionate about it? And to us, that's probably the most interesting part of folklore, not whether or not it's true or false. So that's a little bit different, I think, than a lot of other approaches to this topic and to this subject. So there's just a little introduction for you. There's a lot of other people out there who I'm sure will also love to talk about what folklore is and is not. Hopefully they'll join me in this, but hopefully you enjoyed this video.